Okay, Daniel O'Brien here. Today I'm talking with Charlie Arnott, and I wanted to throw some questions at Charlie. And I wanted to ask you, in Australia at the moment, where right now it's December 2019, there's a lot of drought around the place, and we can all put our hands there and go, right, the drought's here, we can't do anything. But it's not the case. We can do so much. So take it away, Charlie. What could we do if we bought some land to maybe drought proof it for the next drought?
It's a great question, Daniel. I guess there's a couple of ways to approach that. If I'm, I guess, speaking with current farmers, farmers who already have a block of land and they're managing it already, I would be suggesting to them that I always say to people the first paddock you've got to change when you're thinking about, regenerative agriculture or a different way of doing anything on farm is the paddock between your ears. So it's really important, I believe, to get to really look at the psychology of what you're doing. Ask yourself, be really reflective, I guess, is the first step. Think about why you want to change. Are you happy with what you're doing? What's going well about what you're doing? What's not going so well about what you're doing, because often that's the question that needs to be answered, and then the answers that stem from there lead people to looking for alternatives, because, case in point, we're in the middle of an extended dry period, as I like to call them, and people are really questioning, I believe, and I'm speaking to a lot of farmers at the moment, really questioning what they're doing. And the results they're getting, and they're asking themselves questions like, am I? The question that really put me sat me on my ass, years ago, was someone said, "But are you happy?" This is when I was farming 15 years ago, a family farm, and I couldn't actually. I said to him, "Look, I'm not unhappy," which I thought was a really poor question. So I think if farmers ask themselves that question, that's a good one. However, being reflective on what they're currently doing, being ready to break a few paradigms as well. What assumptions are they making that need to be reviewed? Look at their finances, look at their emotional state, look at the landscape, the ecology. Are they happy about the way the ecology is looking? I really think people need to consider the ecology as one of their bank accounts. We have a financial bank account, obviously cash, and we have liabilities and assets. We don't often consider the value of the ecology and the landscape we have. So really having a good hard look at every aspect of your business, and really being critical about yourself. The thing about being critical with yourself is that it's important not to chastise yourself about your past and have regrets. Again, one of the challenges I had when I was, assessing my current situation 15 years ago was really reflecting on what I'd learnt from my father and what I'd learnt at university. And often there's a fear of change, and that change means the process of change means potentially not admitting that you were wrong, but actually looking back and going, what, I could have done something differently. I could have done something better. And so there's a real, some psychology around legacy and succession and so on there with farming families that have been at it for a long time. So really being reflective, looking at almost like resetting the clock and going, what, if there was no drought and perhaps financial situation wasn't an issue, and I was sort of starting from day one, how would I want this farm to look? What are my new KPIs? In a business, we're often talking about financial KPIs. Not many businesses have ecological KPIs or emotional KPIs. In our business, we have a monthly position statement that Fred, our farm manager, puts together every month. The first page of that has a list of a list of questions based on our values and the goals we have for the business, and we rate ourselves as individuals. We create a KPI for ourselves, and if there are scores there that are a bit lean, we ask the person how they're going. So being really critical of your mental state, because that's often the thing that will literally drive people off farm. So I trust I'm sort of in a very roundabout way, Daniel, answering your question. My point is that, before we just go and think about changing our practices and sort of, selling our gear or sort of jumping headlong into changing our practices, we've got to sort of really work on the psychology of it and being really clear on why we're doing it, and then set yourself some goals. And as they say, the trick with planning is to be planning. Having a plan is fine, but you've got to be able to be dynamic and adapt to the environment, to your financial situation, the family dynamics, and so on. So start setting yourself a few goals. There's probably a step before that even, Daniel, which is really have a look at your values. Because the values of you as an individual and the values of your family will help you create the framework for setting goals and setting a vision, which is a step even before setting goals. What vision do you have for your property? A lot of farmers and conventional farming, as I was, we didn't have a vision for the farm. We had like 6 and 12-month goals, and they weren't even talked about. We just said we've got to grow wheat this year and make some money out of beef and wool. That was as far as the planning went. So really being specific about setting goals, really finding out, identifying your values, because once you identify your values, and create a vision based on those values, it's much easier to set goals. It's much easier to make decisions, because you're making your decisions based on, exactly that, your values. And when you're using your values and creating that vision, you've got much more chance of setting the appropriate goals and actually achieving them, because they're aligned. You're not going to waste a whole lot of time chasing dead ends and going places and buying gear and doing things that you might then one day go, my God, what was I doing? We did a lot of that with some success, I have to say. Sometimes when you take a risk and you don't exactly know where you're going, sometimes you have some interesting and positive outcomes. But especially in a time of drought, planning, aligning your business plan with your values and vision is critical. So I guess that's the place to start, Daniel. Start between the ears. As we move, a lot of people understand totally the fear of changing from a current farming situation to a different type of farming, and let's just call it regenerative farming. If we're stepping towards a farm, an ecology that is growing, the quality and the quantity of soil, I would say you're sort of stepping in the regenerative headspace and in the regenerative world. Any practice or business principle that you're applying to your business that is impacting and improving, say one of the 5 landscape functions, and we're talking about solar, mineral, biological, social, and water. Any practice that's sort of supporting and strengthening any of those cycles, I would call as a regenerative practice. So, if we're looking at changing our business to sort of start utilising the many number of practices are out there, any practice that's leading us to that is the best way to start taking on these new practices is to do it slowly. I went cold turkey. I sort of got very excited about the education that I put myself through, the principles I was learning, and I was just gung ho, and I sort of made calls halfway through the course I did. It was a Grazing for Profit course about 15 years ago, put on by RCS, a resource consulting service up there in Yeppoon. And I was making phone calls halfway through the week going, put those cattle together and do this and do that. I mean, that was fine, and that was just my personality. But I'd say to people, once you're sort of getting in the right headspace, reading a few books, thinking about that maybe some changes need to be made, just step lightly, step softly into this sort of new world of agriculture. We say to people, look, if you're spending some hundreds of dollars per hectare on your land per year, it's probably less than that if you're grazing, but if you're cropping, you might have some hundreds of dollars annually spent on per hectare. Just carve off 10% of that, and just try a biological fertilizer. Just try a biodynamics. Just try a compost or something, So you're not changing your budget a hell of a lot. You're not taking on a whole lot of risk. You're not buying a whole lot of extra gear. You know, what I've found and what we've become pretty good at is being very resourceful. You know, we instead of just going to the shop and buying a bag of fertiliser or drum of chemical or a new bit of gear, we're really thoughtful about, or we actually don't do any of that anymore, but I mean, we're really thoughtful about what we're trying to achieve and how we can achieve that. And I was so used to in our conventional farming days of looking to others for answers, you know, our agronomist and so on, for a formula. You know, and this stuff is not about formula. It's not about adopting something. This is about adapting principles and practices to your situation. So step into it lightly. Just carve a little bit of your budget per hectare or per whatever your unit of measurement is, and just try it. You know, and that's not a big risk. And you know, you just monitor the results. You know, it helps to be a little bit scientific in this part of it, because if you're that way inclined, you know, if you've got some numbers behind it and you're growing more grass or your yields are better or your quality, I mean, this regenerative agriculture is a lot more. Not more. It is probably more about the quality than say in a conventional situation. Sure, we want good quality wheat, but we're really in a commodity game in conventional farming, and we're looking at quantity. You know, looking at volume. Kilos per hectare of beef and kilos of wool and kilos of wheat. So when we start really looking at what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that was a big turning point for me, was you know, I stopped being a commodity farmer, just growing stuff, and I actually considered that I was growing food to feed people. And you know, was when I took on that responsibility. I acknowledged the fact that people were eating the food I was growing, and God, if they only knew how much chemical and crap I was spraying on it, I'm sure they wouldn't eat it. Well, maybe they would have, you know, and that's a whole other conversation around educating, you know, your eaters. But you know, once I took on that responsibility, it totally changed how I did things and the decisions I made. So so it's more of a quality sort of a scenario. You know, we're looking at quality of soil. We're looking at quality of life. You know, we're looking at the quality of our animals, and you know, we look much more at animal husbandry. You know, we're not looking for a drum of backliner to solve a worm problem or some problem. You know, we're turning more to nature for those answers. You know, and we're observing. We're much better observers of the landscape. Charlie Massey talks about. In his book called The Reed Warbler, you know, landscape literacy. I'm still learning every day how to read a landscape, but I'm getting better at it. And once you can start observing and being still and listen and watch, you know, nature's coming up with all sorts of answers. A great example of that is weeds. You know, like and I hesitate to use the word weeds because we don't really use that word anymore. Back in the old days, we had lots of weeds. We had Scotch thistle, we had wireweed, we had all sorts of things that in a cropping and a grazing situation we just didn't want for whatever reason. Actually, some of the reasons I didn't even know why we didn't want them. I just was used to spraying them. It was just what we did. I was in an old sort of paradigm. And but what we do now is we actually, you know, on the theme of observing, is we observe the weeds and we actually start to consider what they're trying to do, why they're there. You know, a weed or these sort of plants are opportunistic. They're actually there to do a job. And you know what? If we really think about it, they're actually helping us. You know, like a wireweed or a Scotch thistle or any number of weeds, everything that we consider a weed, when you stand back and look at it, it's either spreading out to try and cover the soil. It's either got a taproot that's trying to punch into the ground. All plants, you know, whether they're weeds or not, but especially weeds because they tend to have this purpose in nature, are accumulating minerals, right? They're trying to fix an imbalance in the soil, essentially, you know. So if we consider what they're doing and we consider they're actually sitting there telling us something, and we actually can observe that, then we have some really good reasons to leave it there, you know, and let it do it and let it do its thing. You know, let it accumulate nitrogen to replace the, I don't know, the zinc or the copper or something we've been mining, or the phosphorus or something. Let them punch that taproot down and open up get through that hard clay pan or the plough pan. Let them put the rosettes of the thistles out to cover that ground, because, man, that's what we need. We don't want bare earth. So that's a good example of working with nature, because you're not trying to kill the poor thing. I used to wake up every morning trying to kill stuff.
So give me a snapshot of what your farm was like and looked like, say, 16 years ago before you made the change, and what it looks like nowadays.
Now, okay, well, it's a good question. So 16 years ago, say, we would have, especially this time of year, we would, I don't know, I can't remember what sort of spring we had, but we would be have a lot of stock on. We've got about 15% of what we normally have on average, because of this extended dry period. So we would be not feeding, but for many months of the year we would be feeding, especially through summer and winter, okay? Because we would be hoping for an autumn break and a spring break. So at those times of the year, we'd be definitely feeding grain to sheep and hay to cattle, without a doubt. So there's obviously a cost attached to that. We would be feeding them because we had no grass, or little grass. And some paddocks we have no grass. I remember seeing 15, it was probably about the time I sort of changed what we did, looking at one particular paddock, it had crossbred ewes, first cross ewes in there. It was the end of summer and it was literally blowing away. I could hardly see the sheep, and I really started wondering what the hell I was doing. So that happened. That happened not every year, but in, sort of tough times, it would happen. But again, every year, a snapshot would be cattle and sheep being fed, grain being harvested and put into a silo to then feed back to the sheep, hay being cut to then save and put back to the sheep. So our production cycle, our feed requirement of our animals was not matched to our growth. So there were gaps. There were some times where we had a heap of feed and we might cut hay or buy some more stock, which is fine. But more often than not, it was the other way around, where we had more animals on, we didn't have enough feed to feed them. We were spraying a lot of chemical. Every pasture was getting hit with chemical to try and knock out these horrible weeds, as we used to think they were. We would be using drenches in a very sort of methodical way for sheep and cattle, backline and so on, worming. We would be cropping. We don't do any cropping anymore, but our cropping enterprise, and we did canola, we did wheat, we did oats, we did a whole lot of different stuff, grew hay, was propped up. When I say propped up, it was supported by a chemical cycle that we were in. We whether it was to knock out plants or to knock out pests. When you try and take out a pest or a weed, you just then create a problem above and below in the sort of in the food chain there in terms of sort of animal pests and insect pests. So a lot of chemical use. We were doing a pretty good job, winning the odd wheat competition and turning over a lot of stock, but a lot of activity, a lot of death. When I say death, I mean just killing stuff all the time. We were fighting nature, we were battling nature. So I guess that was, if that sort of sets the scene. Now we work with nature. We're reading, we're looking, we're listening to nature. We don't use any chemical. We don't drench. We don't spray, chemical out and anything. We actually stop cropping, mainly so we don't have to use so much chemical. We don't have to rely on that. But we're doing a little bit of multi-species stuff and some pasture cropping just to get back into it. Still no chemical. Our animal husbandry is much more sympathetic to the behaviour of animals. We trained ourselves up in low stress stock handling. So our animals are less stressed essentially, and that sort of precipitates out into better meat quality and happier cattle, happier sheep. We've got introduced some pigs into the system as well, and we're using them in some areas. The sows have just gone into an erosion area. We've got fenced off, and they're helping us sort of bash down some of that erosion area to create a bit of a tilth so that we can throw some seed in there. So they're quite handy in the landscape as well. We're using biodynamics as probably one of the other bigger ones, where instead of buying bags of chemical and fertiliser and so on from in town, we're actually making our own sources of fertility, which again creates a whole lot of wonderful ritual and relationship with the landscape and nature. Our rituals back then were phone call to the agronomist, what do we need, get a drum of this, spray it out. It was pretty objective and sort of hands off, sort of at arm's length sort of relationship stuff. We didn't even have a relationship with our nature, really. We were just at war. But now we're mimicking nature wherever we can, and we're encouraging it, and we're trying to support it to become more complex. Biodiversity, increasing biodiversity in our pasture is what we're doing, as opposed to years ago where we would not value the benefits of biodiversity. We're actually trying to, even our pastures, we're trying to sort of turn into a few species, Coxwood, Phalaris, a couple of clovers. That's all we needed. That was the best stuff. The Burua mix. Now we just encourage everything. We're sowing some things here and there very randomly, and every new species that turns up is our friend. We just want more diversity, because then you start filling feed gaps, and you start filling nutrition gaps. We want our animals to be eating a smorgasbord of food and have every opportunity to self-select for the nutrition they need. So I think that's probably a good, reasonable summary. I guess we're happier. It's just not the reliance on other people to make decisions, and also for products. We don't buy much anymore because we're making sort of our own biodynamic preparations and so on. We buy a bit of feed for the pigs, but they're pasture raised, and they're still getting a lot of their nutrients and their feed from on ground. So it's sort of I wouldn't say it's a closed system, but it's we're becoming much more self-reliant, and that with that comes a lot of a sense of control, and we've become really good at focusing on what we can control. That's probably another distinction between what we were doing before. Before we were focusing on a lot of things that were out of our control, like, I wish it would rain, and what I do now is I still wish it would rain, but I don't. I focus on when it does rain, how can we capture that rain? So we keep ground cover. Our business is not reliant on a whole lot of other people. It's reliant on our decision making, and a lot more about the resources we have on hand to utilise, and not just use up.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so definitely mindset and values for the foundation, and then working with nature. So I think there's some really good points there for people that have a property already, or even if people don't have a property, they can start with the mindset, the vision, the values, the goals of what do I want to see here. So I think that's a great place to start. And then observation, that's a big key, and I'm still learning a lot about that. When, as you know, someone will come to you, goes, how many sheep or cattle can I put here? Or I don't know. Every farm's different, but just the observation, and everything will change throughout a year and 2 years, and just keep that observation. So I think that's a really good tip, and I see it often. Someone buys a farm, and the next day they want to start doing things. It's like, just wait. As you said, like, where's your wet spots? Where's your dry spots? What happens in winter? What happens in summer? So observation, it's an awesome key. So thank you so much for your time. I know you have to run, but I really appreciate your time, Charlie. And let's try and do a follow-up call in another few months and talk more about regenerative agriculture.
Sounds good, Daniel. Love what you're doing with your chicken caravans. You're making it so much easier for farmers to get into that enterprise. I think it's a wonderful thing. All the benefits, pasture management and fertility, and obviously adds another layer of biodiversity in the businesses. So good on you for what you're doing too.
Yep. Thank you. All the best.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks. Bye.